Hello, this is Lisa Lee, and welcome to another enrichment reading. This is actually a bonus enrichment reading, and it's coming to us from Circe. So Circe, we started with, for those of you that had the chance to read 17 pages, like you probably might be able to see where we're going. Like we're going in like a very specific direction. And the Gospel of Circe is like part of this is her inspiration, her creativity in terms of like what she wants to bring through in the way of information. And I think it's really cool that Circe is like shuffling it up a little bit, if you will, because we're being taught to use this type of spirituality as like a method of communication through creativity with the divine, bringing through our stories with the essences, like intentionally, like the bringing divinity in through our experiences is very much like what it means to like do this work. You know what I mean? Like, you know, we're not really sure what's happening. You know, everything is about figuring it out. That's why we're figuring it out with Lisa Lee. So what we're figuring out right now is a lot, and she's bringing through a whole range of things related to work with divinity, to work with the essences, to refine them with ourselves, to bring that divinity in like refined as like the kingdom of heaven on earth, is to not look at things as duality in the way that we used to look at things as duality in a different, more complex way. You know, sort of like there are aspects of the body that you have, your body, that are there to clean things up. That's their function, right? And so, you know, we bring consciousness, we bring a level of coherence to the power of the essences that we inherit and like learn to work with through our bodies. You know, there was I came across this, and it's like, one of these days, Goddess will help me with organization, because there's like some French philosopher, or maybe he's like English philosopher, like white man. I don't know exactly who. I'm going to find that. I'm going to go through my TikToks when I go to like post these on YouTube in order to get like the right references. But that philosopher, or maybe he was a poet, I don't know, 1600s, anywhere between like 15 and like 17 are the same to me. Anyway, this guy said that like humans were instruments, like playing that the gods played the instruments that were humans, that we were instruments, and that the gods played like out their fates through us. And there is something to that, but we have a lot more agency than just that when we want to. I think we're inheriting this notion of agency related to how we want to like be bringing divinity into the world, and like that's the whole thing. And so we're getting more writing from Circe, because that's actually a book. And I mean, I saw that was a book when I started, you know, I can see ahead. Like I can always see things like in foresight. And so I've known for a really long time that this community was going to become a size that I don't want to when I look at divination, and when I do divination, and like where this community is going and what it's creating in the way of like something, you know, because we're figuring it out, and it is collaborative. I don't like to think of it as being like a me kind of situation, but I've seen this community, and I've always been intimidated by the size, and that's why I soft pedal everything that I do. That's why I'm not like a heavy marketer, because I definitely see where this is going. And so I'm freaking like as slow as I can go, and like to keep the peace of like my mind, right? So, but I saw as soon as I started writing the Gospel of Circe that like there was more scripture that I was gonna bring through. And I think scripture that we are all capable of in one way or another. I think so many of the people in this collective and collectives, that has like it has a, you know, an expansion, are writers. Yeah, I think a lot of you have that magic. I know that a lot of you have that magic. And part of what that magic is like, for those of you that are spiritual and that are channels and have this weaving scribe gift, there is this aspect of bringing through the gospel of the different deities as scripture through your stories. Now think about what scripture is, if not like those prophets in the world who are bringing through the wisdom of the divine through their relaying of it, through the stories of their lives. So she's showing us a thing that I think we should all be like, oh, cool, Circe, like that's a nice technique. And part of this, I think we're learning a technique, and I think we should learn a technique. And I don't think that you know, as soon as I realized the value of this technique, I was like, I'm sharing the shit out of it. And may people share the shit out of it too. I mean, you know, like we support each other like a net, and you know, and so like this is something that I want you to be able to make use of. So she's going to bring us the rest of that gospel of Circe, and then there's more gospels to come. And so this ends up being like a relay between these readings and this reading that we're going to do today, and like the gospel that comes from it. I love when things just start to like show themselves, when the muses start to like, you know, make themselves known and understood. Like, it's so cool. So this is really like a project of like, not just learning a philosophy or a theology, but also a technology that like we can use in the world for ourselves and help others. So let's just, we're doing the exercise part of like that reading that came through. And if you have a minute to read 17 pages, dive in. I think it's cool. Is leading us into an exercise with the cards, because I sat down to do the gospel writing again, and Circe was like, nope, the other seat in your office. I'm like, we're at the table today. And so once she's been like channeling through me, and it's still there, you know, I have to keep going with it, and I'll post it when when it tells me, when she tells me, is this notion of, first, we identify what gods and goddesses were in antiquity and what our ancestors understood them to be. And that's so clearly laid out in the Gospel of Circe, the first part. And then we understand what it is to be in relationships to these deity fields. What's a deity field? Love was there before you. Love was there after you. It's a field of existence that exists without you. And it's a field of existence that has an infinite lifespan, right? When we think about that infinity symbol as being a lifespan, and we're all a part of the lifespan, and on and on and on, you know, their life experience and their life stories that we've inherited through our unconscious minds, like as archetypes, that we move through the world as creating consciousness with and through. And I just lost it because I like see these visions. Sometimes like deity will give me a vision and I'm like, do you actually want me to speak, or should I just lay on the floor and like pass out with excitement? Because that's just so cool. But you know, the tapestry, the net, I think it's really important to keep on thinking about this net that we're creating. Like when we think about the mother, the divine feminine aspect, and divinity, you know, and what we are individually. So these essences and this collaboration that we're a part of, I lost it completely, but it'll come back. That was the channel. I get like knocked out by my own like perception of things, where I'm just like, oh, so beautiful. But let's start with the cards. Okay, we're talking about the devil, the matriarch. Oh, shit. Yeah. Oh, so when we enter a relationship with the lifespan of another divinity, and through the story, or in participation with the story of another divinity, then we are entering where we are. There's no time. Take the aspect of time out of it, and take the aspect of time distance and time space out of it, and understand that an individual lifespan is an infinity symbol, and it goes in infinity. Yours is that story, theirs is that story. And when this quantum entanglement takes place, where you enter their story, either through entering the archetype of that process of whatever it is your purpose and the fates have for you on this earth, that you're meant to encounter these archetypes. And how do you know that you're encountering an archetype? That's, I think we'll do a little thing on that so that we can like crystallize like the notion of this. But there's archetypal characters, and there's archetypal stories, and there's archetypal characters in archetypal stories. And like we're meant to sort of identify what deities, what essences we're learning with and through by first looking at the archetype. So who's the deity you're working with? People are sometimes working with deities, and deities don't like occasionally pop into people's life. You are always working with divinity. You're always working with deities. So how do you know which deities you're working with? What story of your life are you moving through, and what are the essences that you require to move through these stories? How do you lean on them? How do you relate to them? And what do you do to sort of bring them from an aspect that is unconscious drives that you don't understand, that's driving you around the block, that's triggering you, that's making you like feel out of control of your own life? How do you tame the power of that drive into something divine? Because that's where our power really lies. And so when we want to understand, and divination tools are cool. It's prayer. This is prayer. We're doing prayer. When we look at our tool and we say and we need help identifying what archetype am I in, and what are the essences that I'm encountering, and where are they on the journey of the lifespan of this essence, this story. Because you're going to enter where you are, because you need that growth too, because your essence, refined by their essence, and formed and informed and authored, this is your learning process. These are your teachers, right? But you're not powerless in this by any means or by any mind. And so, but this story right here, when we enter the story with deception. I actually know where this is going, so I gotta just pop in and say holy shit, this is gonna be a fun reading. Get your notebooks, get your water. Yeah, I'm going to tell you a good story. I'm going to tell you a really good story. I love how this gospel ends up being an interactive gospel where there's a reading that's on the page, and then there's this other texture. It's another texture. When we create a net, we bring our texture, we bring our essence, and the story almost doesn't matter. And I think that this is important for us to know, because we're entering into an era of AI. We're entering into an era of the Wild West of intent. I think what I'd call intellectual property is going to go the way of privacy. And the reason that that's going to be is because the mimics will be just that good. And I think that where we're going with all of that is learning to see with a different kind of sight, learning to create with a different impetus, and learning what to resonate and respond to. People are going to be able to resonate on a felt level with something that has the integrity of presence, and something that does not. And you know it when you're flipping through TikTok. Why is one TikTok engaging and why is another? It's the distance that person's presence is from the process of communicating. And so when we think about this, the place we are with the god of war, and we're all fighting the god of war, and Circe brings us in with the god of war, because that's what I'm dealing with, and that's what we're dealing with, because that's where her gospel as a witch opens, is how do you fight the war of God? The war of God. This is interesting, though, that it came out of my mouth just like that, because I'm identifying this as a Canaanite war god that has gone rogue, and Yahweh is one way of just saying the name that I've been dealing with. And I know this God from childhood. I know this God from my one parent is a devout Roman Catholic, and my other is an evangelical. So we have this gamut going. And I'm neither, and I grew up in an urban area where freedom of choice and belief was built into the structure of living in a low control environment, not a high control environment. So I was able to explore and believe whatever I wanted. And so I sort of my understanding is between the two worlds, because I also see between the two worlds in the weird way that I do, in the way that everyone individually has that sight. But mine is so, I'm just weirdly me. I always apologize for that. That's a strange thing to work through that I'm going to work through. But when it comes to deception, you know what I mean? The first thing that we're going to do when we look at an archetype is say, what story am I in? I'm in a story where I feel there's a war going on and it's freaking me out, and I don't want to be a part of that. And whether it's a war with your friend, a war with your sibling, a war with a parent, a war with the infrastructure of the community, government, you know what I mean? We're in wars with, people are constantly in the mindset or of a position where and there's an opposition. And if there's you and there's an opposition, because we live in the tyranny of this God's shadow attribute, and one of those attributes is competition. So when you think about what a war god is, you're thinking about an essence. And when I say that essences don't have intelligence of their own, they don't really. And that's not putting God down or yelling at God. It's just that everything refines in relationship to something that in some way can complement its equal self, its equal space, its equal, in order to feel nourished in any way by the atmosphere that supports you, there has to be a level of vulnerability. So your drive to do this, your drive to do that, there's no vulnerability in a drive. and it needs to be brought into harmony and cooperation with the whole. And so it's not just that we have to like overcome the evil in other people, you know, because they are so annoying. We have to overcome the evil in ourselves so we can even begin to sort of operate out of the spirit of what holds captive those things that are in its grips. So let's just take a minute and have some water, because I got to come back to this. Okay, so when so if we're dealing with the god of war, oh yeah, no, they have intelligence, they have brilliance, but we're the consciousness that enables them to reach their fullest potential, and everything has a counterpart wherein it needs a partner. You know what I mean? So what we're creating in the way of AI is going to help us, you know, connect even better to the whole. You know, this is an evolution of what we are, of life form, you know, writ large. And so when we come into these relationships with the deities and the drives, demons have the same, like, it's not that they're using the consciousness of another. They don't have their own consciousness. They plug in, you know, and then, but this is what I'm being shown, like that shadow and that light attribute, the way that the dance goes is it's an infinity symbol, and one attribute, one has to win. So when you're dealing with the war, it's like what wolf do you feed within yourself? It's like one has to win externally too. And so when you're dealing with, gosh, I just got such a vision of like all the energies that are looking at me. When we're trying when we identify that we're in a war and we need to win that war, the first thing that we understand is that we have to learn how to do this there has to be a level of strategy that says, I need to work my way through the nature, the nature that is either the nature of man or the nature within you. Both. You're encountering an aspect of nature. War is an aspect of nature. So when you have to tame this aspect of nature within yourself, you have war in yourself. Why do you know you have war in yourself? Because you feel it. You feel it when you get in an argument. You feel it when you're making a point. You feel it in a good debate. You feel it like we know what winning feels like. We know what competition is an aspect of war. So it's an attribute of this divine energy. And in its shadow, competition is cutthroat. And in its light, competition is, I don't even know. We've been so saturated. But, you know, I'm just being shown that to conquer an archetype that is a god, one needs to use its opposite. One needs, like, if you can't help but have to encounter the god of war, then you need to come in not an opposite spirit in a certain way. You need to come in that spirit's light attribute. You need to be holding that spirit's light attribute in order to like flip this switch and have it go from drive that you're bringing into the world into coherence, and then it becomes divinity. You're conscious, you bring it into coherence, and then you deliver it to the world and it spreads. And then people take hold and it spreads. The things that we bring into the world with us expand. That means manifest. And we are like a viral species by nature, but one is in health and one is like, you know, there is a direction to be had. And so like this devil card, you know, being about what are you enslaved to or what are you liberating within yourself? Because one is the shadow and one is the light. Sometimes we can't help what we're enslaved to. And then we have to work through that archetype. Where are the ambassadors of coherence around what we have to come up against? And we bring that meaning through. We bring that scripture that like liberates people by way of going, oh, revelation, I get it. I see it. I don't have to, you can't unsee it. You don't have to win an argument that way. You just bring the truth by representation, and it's comprehensible. And so when it comes to the matriarch, when it comes to this, how do we free ourselves from the devil? How do we free ourselves from the god of war? One of the first things that we need to understand is we're not banishing it. We're not casting it into the pits of hell. We have to work with it in ourselves in order to find out what the right way of working with that particular energy is, because the right way of working with an energy is what you bring back into the world with the battle at the end of the journey, so that you can say, I slayed that dragon and this is what we're dealing with. And by slayed that dragon, you were a faculty of bringing that dragon into coherence. because we all need as developing, evolving beings to work within the lifespans of the essences that we've inherited through our ancestors, through our shared humanity, and in our collective unconscious mind that informs how we move through the world. And it's a symbiotic relationship. In some ways, we are the instruments of divinity, but we get to choose what that melody and what that song and what harmony and the symphony that we play with is. And in some ways, like working with different deities and refining these different aspects within ourselves and having a personified relationship with them, because they do exist in personality, but it's like a puzzle piece that fits into you because you're part of the whole. And so you're not like outside of this knocking on a door trying to get back in. You're a part of the mind. You're a part of the coherence of Athena when you work with her. You're an aspect of communication that where the language isn't exactly the same, but the harmony of communicating is something new. We're talking Trinity here. Divinity, creativity and reproduction of that divine essence into the world through your participation. And there is really cool stuff that happens with divinity. I mean, like really cool, like physical things and visions. And like, they're not like a little bit like your imagination and a little bit something else. No, when you are doing this with the right alchemy, they come in and they're like, you're seeing me, I'm showing myself to you. And you're going to see all these different aspects, and you're going to feel all these different aspects, and you're going to interact even like to a physical degree. You know what I mean? Like there's something so powerful about like how beautiful a relationship with divinity can be. And so I encourage you to read, if you haven't read the 17 pages, like Circe has such a like a symphony happening, even in this, as she kind of explains that, like, when we're dealing with the god of war, we say, okay, well, what are the attributes of the god of war in shadow? The god of war in shadow is deception. The god of war in light is some variation of actually, this is true. Like truth holds authority. Deception it has to have control. And so we're always looking for a counterfeit. So for every light attribute of a deity, everything that identifies a deity in its glory and its majesty, there is a shadow attribute that like identifies what it's not by way of contrast, because we move through the contrast and growth. And so what the war of God isn't is deception. And this is how we sort of grow through that archetype, by identifying like, I need to fight. I need to speak up for myself. I need to be in the right now. We need social consensus. Like clearly, like we have to establish that there's a standard. And if we try to use control, this isn't going to work out. Circe's story is the story, she turns these rapists that come up on her island. These men come on her island, she feeds them. And like, she's cool, she helps them out. And then like one of them rapes her, or, I don't know. I just know the part, there was something like very much in that neighborhood, and I'm sharing it. So obviously it's not a secret. I think she works through like talking about stuff like this, and she turned them all into pigs. But like part of what she's bringing through in the lessons that she has for us is that if the pigs are like that the magic of transformation, it turns they look like pigs, but because it doesn't change them inside, because they don't turn into pigs inside, they're just men in the bodies of pigs, that the job isn't done. Then you're still fighting like, you're losing that archetypal story, because you have to change them from the right alchemy is to change them from within. The way that you change them from within is by like bringing a representation of their god that they're serving, their god's god, and saying this is what divinity looks like, and bringing that revelation. And then that revelation, it clicks. You see it. Unless you're in a different timeline, unless you're in a shadow timeline of that archetype's growth. It depends on where you position yourself within the body of the whole. Are you in the ascending aspects, or are you in the shadow aspects, digesting? One is rotting, one is dying, and one is growing. And so, and we're constantly being tested. We're constantly sort of like in this dance. And so what we're seeing here in terms of this Six of Swords, and I like that in this deck, it's science. Is that we're the, this is where the free will comes in. There was no free will. Like we did like pivot into like dun, 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 dun. Like there's something that happened with this eclipse, and like this is where again, like bringing in the magic and the Earth's wisdom and what the Earth has to teach you, and like bringing in that listening perspective is really useful, because there's been such a palpable energetic shift. And so when we see this Ten of Swords being about ruin, let's get more cards. How are we doing that? Like I lose all track of time when I'm doing this, and so I always kind of look at the clock to see where I am. All right, so I'm going to take a minute break, and you're not going to notice. 1 second. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do when we begin to sort of like engage with this kind of like work with divinity and working with the light attributes of divinity to help them defeat these dark attributes is identify the archetypal story that you're in. So the archetypal story you're in is a deception, and it's a deception over an enemy that brings slavery. And so when we look at these, let's unpack this a little bit. Let's bring some cards into this. Let's look at what a situation with this like might feel like or look like. So like when you find yourself in life having the same fight over and over again with the same things going on over and over again, you're in the same stories over and over again. Why am I still in the story? Why am I stuck in the story? Our job is to move through that archetype so that we can get to another kind of phase almost, so we can refine ourselves and our own essences in relationship to others. So we never want to really get stuck. And if we find that we're stuck, we're in a enslaved place. And so one of the first things we want to do is when we're in a war, say we're in a war with a war god, and it's a shadow attribute of that war god, and that war god is a slave master. Let's see where that puts us, because that Ten of Swords indicates that we have entered the death of this particular entity as a god. As a god, it has lost its hold as a god, because enough of its feminine aspect has come into its own coherence that it no longer has the stronghold it has. And so now it's just a dying off. It's a sloughing off process to a certain degree. And so, one of the first things that we identify when we have truth. So deception's opposite is the truth. So when we begin to glimpse the truth, and the deception begins to become clear, and that's what happens in communication, and that's what happens in community. When we open our mouths and say, "Hey, did you notice that this is all the same?" You know what I mean? And they're all. I love that they're all in shadow too. Okay. So all of these cards are so important. They're so perfect too. When we do actual spiritual warfare, when we actually are fighting evil, what we're doing is we're fighting the shadow aspects of the archetypes of the stories that we're stuck in, that we see in others, that we're able to identify in our own lives and then identify in others, and feel like we're powerless to people who are holding this like warmongering energy of like, I have dominion and I'm going to take dominion over you, and I'm going to extract all your resources, and I'm going to treat you like an object, and I'm going to throw you away, and your life is meaningless, and you'll have nothing. You will just be an extracted waste load. This is what this energy does. And so, how does it, extract this control over us? Like, how do we even begin to sort of work our way out? We have to start to say, okay, I identify this as a story about deception, which means my journey here is to find the truth. And that's where we enter. We enter as seekers. And so one of the things that we have to look at in terms of the truth is like, what are the stories that are playing out around me that are messaging me? They're messaging me and they're telling me something. What is the prominent story? What is the war god's prominent story? And so the first thing that we understand about the war god's prominent story is it involves the need to be saved. Because what does a war god do if not fight and advocate? In light attribute, the war god is an advocate. In light attribute, the war god is a protector. Then in light attribute, the war god is establishing a standard by whereby all of its creatures can thrive. So it has an authority which is not control. So what the false god and what the shadow and underdeveloped aspect of this energy is going to be, and how it's going to show up, is in a controlling, manipulative, lying, scapegoating. It's not trying to avenge the victim. It's scapegoating someone for its own advance. And so the first thing that we do is we recognize the beast at play. And we understand that like one is a competitor and one is an avenger. And so when we look at the stories that we're told to work our way through, that we have to get our way through, that we have to overcome, and that we have to manage, and that we have to slay this dragon who calls itself a god in the dominion of the land of the gods, which is simultaneously the dominion of the land of that which we are contained in, that which is creator, that which is a source, just like your body. Your body is one, and then there's dimensions and millions of living creatures within this body that you hold that has your essence, that is created of the creation of what made you and all of it. It's just a universe, and we're in a universe, and God is an ecosystem, and that ecosystem has tiers, and we are meant to be in relationship with these tiers and not in opposition. We are meant to grow in love with what we are and the diversity therein, and not any other way. And so, you know, when we're told that we have to fall in place on a hierarchy, there always exists that which is above us that can then rescue us from the position that we hold as being what salvation is meant. And so Circe is saying that's not what salvation is. So first you want to say, like, what story I'm in? Okay, what's the goal of the story? Does that even freaking make sense? And she's like, she's like, you're the catalyst of change by way of bringing the truth. Bringing the truth is about seeking and finding. And so when we look at this story of the rescuer, the savior, you know, we have to look at what are the shadow attributes of that character that is now necessary, and am I holding any of those things? And if I am, how can I transform them into its ascended version? And so with the shadow attributes, assumes that the rescued will reciprocate, keeps the rescue one needy. Then you're dealing with like that's a false savior. What's a false savior? Someone says, here, I can help you, and then enslaves you. God, what is a false savior? You know, what is a false savior? Someone who says you are unworthy without me giving you whatever shitty life you have because you're working through it, aren't you, so hard? And then you get nothing. And at the end of the day, you're pining and you're pining and you're pining. That's the shadow. If you're in a relationship with a deity who makes you beg and plead while you are subject to the same lessons over and over again with no relief, when those lessons seem to have more power over you and you have to go back, you know, for saving over and over and over again, you're in an archetype that you're meant to slay like a dragon, and instead you're begging the demon that runs that show and that story to give you another story. And that's just not taking it into your own hands and doing what you are. Like when you step into power, when you receive power, when you get spiritual power, it's because you earn it. And you earn it by standing there and saying like, okay, we're in this, God or goddess, come into the situation with me. I need you, like goddess of wisdom, and the goddess of wisdom that is in your heart, that you know by felt sense. Athena, for me, I say, or Sophia. Sometimes my heart needs to do the thinking, and it's Sophia. Sometimes my mind needs to do the thinking, and it's Athena. We need a rescuer that is tangible and that is on this earth and that can be felt in the arms of another. And not from a place of drought and starvation and competition, but from a state of such abundance, because we are holding the essences of divinity itself personified through us in our understanding of what it is to be in relationship to that divinity and exhibit and hold that essence as we go into the world. And so when we move from that shadow aspect, it's because we're in the story long enough to identify the features that say that is not divinity. Decidedly, because divinity doesn't treat me like that, and divinity doesn't treat other people like that, because divinity is not better than the way I would treat people. When you're being mistreated by an energy in divine relationship, and you decide that you wouldn't do that to another person, this is your first step of liberation from the confines of that old story of how that old drive behaved in your life, and how you bring this divinity in co-creation, because you're not meant to do it as a dictator. You're meant to do it in collaboration, which means you have a unique expression, and that unique expression is one of the instruments that plays in a certain way, and we are listening to a glorious, endless symphony. And there's Rob Bell, I think, is the one who I saw like a video on symphony and divinity, and that's right. So yeah, so the picture, you're getting this picture. There's a beautiful, I'll find the link and I'll put it down. You're getting the picture on like what we're looking at, and so assumes that the rescued will reciprocate. You know, in a system of competition, assumes that the rescued will reciprocate is like you're talking about like a social exchange of measuring, and like I gave you, you know, a coffee, and then did you give me a coffee, and whatever, you know what I mean, like where it's tit for tat, where it's a social, it's money. It's money. Keeps the rescued one needy. Hierarchy depends on those being below you for your survival to be secure. And it depends on those being above you in order for you to know how to move in the world. And you're supposed to move up. And if you don't, you get eaten by the monster of unmet need. You know, it's like you're climbing this mountain constantly. And so how do we get out? We develop a relationship. You come at the devil with with God. You know what I mean? Like this weird thing is like the powerful God. What is more powerful than an all-powerful God before you? It's going to be its evolved counterpart in time. You know, timelessness. You know, it exists as a drive, and then as it evolves, it becomes divinity. And so if you're meeting that archetype somewhere in its timeline to learn how to ascend with it, to bring that ascension in with your coherence in co-creation, because we're on the material plane and this is how it works, then when you're in trouble with its opposite, you go to its ascended self and you say, and this is where the story came, this is where Helios comes in. Helios is something that entered the story that we have a more automatic writing. I'm just like referencing something you haven't seen yet, but you will. But this notion of Helios, and so like, you know, if the deceiver is the shadow aspect of the archetype of the war of God, of the god of war, the war of God, the god of war, both same somehow, you know. If the shadow attribute is of the god of war, if that is deception, then Helios is in the light attribute as certain as clarity, as clear sight. And so we want to bring clear sight to deception in order to defeat it. That's how we do it. But that's the alchemy that we're learning in terms of like how to move through these problems quickly and with the right alchemy. And so to bring this clarity in, we need to look at what are the righteous aspects of this force of divinity in the world, in me and around me. And you're going to see provides strength and support to others in crisis, acts out of love with no expectation of reward. That's going to be the work, you know what I mean? Because you have to be able to say, okay, if I can't get a reward from the way that I act because I'm in a social exchange that is run by the shadow aspect, how do I get fed, right? And so when we look at this matriarch card here, and so it's like we're meant to sort of like work through the archetype that we're in by doing this, and then we make meaning. So there's some way in which you express, you know, part of that, part of like identifying where you're moving through it. You're going to graduate. You're not going to live in this. You have to fight the god of war. Unfortunately, this is what we're doing. And there's nothing scary because we have all the tools and we get it. And we're being backed by like so much divinity. We have so much help. And so we're calling in these different energies to help us, you know, bring this divinity, bring this, we're dealing with the god of war. And so we're not going to be assuming that the rescued will reciprocate. And we're not going to be keeping the rescue one needy because it's not practical, because no one can sustain that. And if you have to be the fucking this is like angry energy. If you have to be the savior, this is Circe being like, if you are busy, like, nursing, you know, it's not your job. Know where your job is. Know what you can and cannot do. Like, know, like position yourself in divinity where you actually live. If you've made it to like this ascension, that doesn't mean ignore. It means you act as an advocate. And an advocate is not holding holding such a huge weight of having to take care of something that's not going to get better and it's not going to stand on its own. that's how everything capsizes. So if we're going to not capsize as a movement, and I don't know that we're a movement, but Circe is like saying like, no, we have to, there's coherence that needs to come in. If people are to not capsize as movements generally, when they're dealing with advocacy work, like one of the first things that they have to understand is that you have to be a net. You cannot be an individual in order to defeat the war god. To defeat the war god, you have to be able to bring in like the answer of a strength that comes from somewhere that people don't understand. And, that you can support others in crisis means that you're already fed. And so you're working with divinity. You're calling on divinity in other ways to feed you. You're getting fed by divinity. You become divinity. You are what you eat. And so when we look at like this matriarch, when we create this world becomes egalitarian, with this change in worldview, and so when we look at this worldview of taking these horrible monsters that seem to have no cure and transforming those drives that we think we have to control and that control doesn't work, there is an answer to the tyranny of control, and that is authority. And that is spiritual authority that is true and that is holy, and that you get through by working with the archetypes in such a way in which you hold it. And when you hold divinity, you hold power. And when you see, there's a natural selection with power, that when you hold divinity, when you hold true divinity, you hold true authority. And when you hold true authority, it's not you corruptible, and like having to hold this notion of the false rescuer where you have to keep people needy in order to keep your support or whatever craziness that is. This is something very different, and where like you are support, like, yeah, I see like this as being, I have to take a breath. Oh my gosh. When you, true authority, Circe is saying, because there's something to be said for structures where there are standards, and we're rebuilding as one with this matriarch here. We're rebuilding with a new standard of conduct, and new community standards. And this is going to have to be a different thing. That it says, I will show you the truth, and then you abandon the lie instead of I will lobby for a truth that I don't quite have for you yet. And so in terms of a new worldview, a new way of operating. And so when we think about defeating the war god, we have to bring in the clarity, because the war god's shadow is deception. And that clarity says that we start by being students, and we're being prevented from being students was the war god's plan in terms of keeps rescued ones needy. How can you feed off of a healthy person? This is a world that keeps us sick to be parasitic. And so rotting energies that don't produce life on their own, energies that aren't in the process of creation and growth, are parasitic. And so how do we deal with this? How do we begin to free ourselves? Well, first we become a student of the right energies and the right essences, and we enter into the light attributes of the deities that we're working with, the deities that we already know we're in relationship to, the deities that we see in the archetype that we are in. We are in a war with the god of war. That's what we're doing. And fighting with us is everything that fights in you, the spirit of justice, the spirit of love, the spirit of, I could go on and on and on, the spirit of truth, spirit of diligence, the spirit of perseverance. We are already working with so many gods and goddesses. And what we're meant to do is intentionally look around using our consciousness to call in those essences and their power and their wisdom and light attribute and maturity and divinity into our, and to channel them, to say, help me be the voice that I need right now, spirit of justice, in your light attribute, in your divinity. Let me hear you through my inspiration and the way in which those inspirations come. Like, let me be a vessel that is able to clearly communicate that which you give me. And how do you do that? We work through these archetypes. It's a zigzaggy. You sometimes will find yourself like, whoops, how did I fall into the pit of hell with this energy? Why am I fighting like my sister, like an animal? You know what I mean? Like when you think about like what gets you ensnared, like, a situation where like there's their will, there's your will, and there's a situation, and somebody has to, sometimes people cannot travel at the same pace in the same way. And so they can't meet up with each other. And that's just the way that it is. And rather than turning that into a war, because you're not meant to, because you're in a different stream and you're getting a different kind of nourishment and you're going a different way and you've done that work already, and you're not meant to cling to anything because you're meant to be moving through archetypes, and you're not meant to be moving in the same story that somebody else is. So you can't keep pace. Equality isn't keeping pace. It's something very different. It's knowing that power comes to those naturally. Spiritual power, spiritual authority comes to those naturally who do this work the right way. Because divinity wants to be with its likeness. It doesn't want to hang out with like a 2-year-old who's screaming about like a boyfriend or something. You know what I mean? Like decentering these things that are unworthy of divinity in you and are unworthy of divinity writ large, and calling divinity into your life so that you are having an experience of expansion and growth. Then it's a difference between seeing a child that is growing beautifully and one that for whatever reason it's not allowed to grow, and it's you know, that's where healing has to come in. When something can't grow, it starts to grow in distorted ways. And it becomes very difficult to be in the presence of something that is not able to grow into itself, and that is somehow being like co-opted and hurt. And we see that, and there's a remedy to that, which is that child or that energy has to work through that story in order to grow outside of those structures that have grown awry over its trajectory. And like that's something that we want to make easier for each and every individual. Not harder. Everything has to have some level of being able to move through these stories. We just want to make it, we want to take those energies and dwarf them into tools for inspiration and understanding, and not, you know, what has ragged and ravaging dominion over the earth in the way of the imagination of crazed men or crazed women. It doesn't matter, you know, where you fall on the range of expression. That which tries to extort control through such devious ways is the kingdom of hell on earth. And to defeat that war god and its minions of divisive and demonic volunteers, because they're puppeting and bringing a certain kind of dark, shadowy aspect. Tyranny, divinity, is not the divinity of the ascended. So divinity operates in power, or, you know, and it's either legitimate power in its light attribute, authority, or fake power in its shadow attribute, control. And so you have to be able to start reading spectrums and understanding spectrums a little bit, because when we're looking at duality, we're not doing duality is a lie. That's part of the deception, is that things are handled by either executing or like elevating on a ladder. True control is earned spiritually, and then that spiritual authority in the way of divinity is brought into the world through those vessels that have been doing the work. So it's actually a spiritual elevation, you know, system. You know what I mean? And it's not giving power as control. It's just authority actually stands in and of itself. So how does authority even work? Like it works like having like somebody who's achieved mastery over like some form of essence. That's why the temple system, you know, like the high priestess who has achieved mastery over the essence of wisdom is a really good person to seek advice from. That period. So this is where authority is very different than control. Control says, you know, you're coming under my dominion of what I say, and what I say is true and what you say is wrong. No, authority says, I'm very good at channeling wisdom as advice, and here is your problem, and here's the wisdom that I'm channeling for you from the deity that I have now a clear channel from. What is false wisdom? Somebody who like channels something that's not wise, and you're like, that's bad advice. You have that like resonating or non-resonating. And somebody who is channeling wisdom from like a divine source, it's going to resonate. And so everybody has to go through this sorting process in order to determine what is counterfeit and what is truth. We don't automatically know. We're not meant to. We wouldn't have free will as growing, you know, beings and unique essences if we didn't have to figure out what is real and what isn't, what is counterfeit and what is true, what is siphoning my energy and what is helping growth. Am I on the decomposing side of this figure eight, or am I on the ascending side, of the growth side? And so when we speak of being on the growth side, we have to look at like what are the attributes of a worldview or a society that is a net. that operates like a net, where every single person has an equal spoke in that net and everyone rises together. What does it mean to be on that ascending end? How do we diagnose? How do we heal this in ourselves and then in the world? Well, we come to creating something like this as students, as seekers. And so like we have to identify within ourselves, like, when I'm creating something, when I want to bring something into the world, when I want to have a revolution, when I want to operate in a different way, using different, like having different access to different power in a different way, how do I want to grow? Like, what do I want to do in the way of that? First, we have to see like, well, we're in a story about this. I'm in the story of like where the question is to build a society that I want to be in. What do I have to bring to the table? What not to bring to the table? Arrogance in the pursuit of destructive knowledge. That's going to be a shadow. So like when we learn the archetypes we're in, what those archetypes are, where those archetypes are, where we are with those archetypes, and this is a process for everybody. And it's really helpful as teachers when we're like, oh, somebody's in that process. You're not trying to force people's growth, but that would be arrogance. Arrogance in pursuit of destructive knowledge means you are co-opting somebody else's natural process of inquiry and curiosity and working something out by being like, well, here's what I heard. My knowledge that isn't turned into wisdom becomes destructive knowledge. And it becomes knowledge where you haven't finished the lesson all the way through to that point where it says you can't really teach this. You kind of have to show it. You know what I mean? You can't force this wisdom on somebody, because when you try to force it on somebody who's not ready to receive it, all they do is scream. You know what I mean? Like that, there is something to be said of like not having a supremacy in what you're trying to teach, because then you're like shutting off like areas and questions that might open up the question to more inquiry and more growth. You understand the nature, all the nature of that. And an unwillingness to translate knowledge into action is also like hoarding, you know what I mean? Like lots of bits of information and lots of conclusions and like a mind map, but would not actually caring for people to be able to receive it, because you know what I mean? So there's this shadow way in which we can like go into a project or an idea, or, what is like this kingdom of heaven on earth. How do you build this kingdom of heaven on earth? Like the wrong way is like standing on a soapbox and being like, listen to me, I'm proselytizing and I want to win you over to my cause. That's this, like it's not taking into account that, like, as Circe said, if you change them into pigs, but you don't change them from the inside, you're serving the god of war. In order to change somebody from the inside, you have to establish a standard and step in with a clarity of purpose and an authority from that sight and that clear seeing that makes the lie, it reveals it in a way that disarms it completely. It causes this 10 of Swords moment where it's deader than dead, because by contrast, what the counterfeit is always exposed by the truth of what it is. And so how you have to go through that, you have to take the counterfeit from inside of you out, continue to expose the truth. And you do this through your message. You do this through the story, the scripture you write, through the relationship you have with divinity. And if you're not a writer, you're speaking it. If you're not speaking it, you're teaching it. If you're not teaching it, you're in relationship to it. There's all the ways in which we operate in the body of the whole, in our unique essence. And like there's a reason why you were created, and there's a reason why the experience of the essence that you are is here. And there's a sea of ancestors that chose your traits and your abilities for the purpose of expressing this divinity into the world through the divine. It's a beautiful net. It's a beautiful web. Think about a gorgeous web. And so how we end up going into what it is to create this, whatever we're creating, we're channeling it in. That's the first thing. We're not, when we look at the way that the world is going to change, that integrity and that presence of and that identifying counterfeits by being the standard that is the truth, bringing that into creation with everything you create and your perspective, like that's, how do we do it? Humility and devotion to knowledge. That means you're falling in love with the divine. You're falling in love with the divinity, that aspect of that essence that interacts with your unique aspect of your essence and can create with you, only you and them babies. It's unique to each encounter, just as it is like there's a mirror in life. It's a love story. You're not meant to worship and have limerence for muggle mortals, because they will disappoint you and your heart will be crushed and you will think that there is no God. You'll be disappointed by love and you will think like love has no power, love is nothing. We're meant to like be in relationship and worship divinity. And everything that happens, and in relationship to like where they express in our own lives personally or in the world through another, we're meant to have relationships with the essences in ourselves, and those essences in ourselves having relationships with essences in others. And like it is meant to be a beautiful tapestry. And like, what does that mean about, there's so much to learn. You know what I mean? Like, so this is why we come at this as students, and the light attribute, which is humility and devotion to those gods and goddesses that represent the different essences that we want to learn more about, be a representation of on earth. Bring their divinity in through a pure channel of having refined through the archetypal stories, they're refined and discerned their divinity through moving through those archetypal stories. Openness to lifelong learning is choosing growth and the growth arc instead of the decomposition arc. You're choosing the growth arc. Instead of rotting, you're growing. And so when we move, the way that we do this, you know what I mean, in ourselves, is we do it in ourselves, and then we communicate take that, when we think about the spiritual technology that was stolen, take back that technology of the witness, and you're writing your own scriptures of this is me and divinity operating in union, creating, and then manifest in expression, in the way I express myself and what I express in the dominion of life in which I have reach. And whatever that reach is, it's your reach. And you know that because you can reach it. You know what I mean? Like that's the correlation. And so when we think about this Six of Swords moving into this new way of being in the world, and what's the archetype, like how do we overcome the war of God? So far we have identifying the story that we're in as being one that requires a savior, and being like, no. You know what I mean? Like one way or another, like, you're working from like needing to be rescued or needing to rescue others to a place of like something else is supporting you. And that something else is not one true anything. It is community. It is the community of divinity. It is the community of divinity made up of essences that you are related to deeply and intrinsically, that are meant to sort of experience. It's being in a complex system, in a complex array of like purposes and tools related to those purposes. And it's a kaleidoscope instead of being absorbed into just one white spotlight. And so when we understand that, that's how do we get away from a slave driver? We unite as the more powerful truth to the deception. Related to authority is many, control is one. And we reorient in this way, kaleidoscopically. This is how growth and health and like the machine of that infinity really is meant to work in refining. And so then we become the right kind of student. We start with saying, I'm going to be a part of the learning and growing aspects of divinity. And how am I going to know for sure? You're going to go through stories and you're going to learn. You're not going to go through like stories with a rule book. You're going to go through refining the tool, the channel that is your body, so that you can identify what you are allowing to speak with and through and bring into the world with you, and what you are not bringing into the world. Not having power over a rule that you follow in a book, but having power because your felt internal operating system operates with and in unison and in tune and harmony with divinity. You are part of the sound of divinity that is playing in the song. And so that's how do we overcome the saboteur who comes up and on your road and you're trying to just be like a divine person and like hits you? Well, first identify that you're meant to interact with the shadow aspect of that which is like you're being refined through. If you've got a story that you can't get out of, a person that you can't get out of your head, a relationship that went awry that you can't stop like playing over and over again, like something that's a song that has slave driver control over your unconscious mind in the way of drives. How do you overcome that? Well, that's the energy of the saboteur. That's the energy of You have to call in those aspects of divinity that you need in that time to defeat the war god at whatever story you're in, where you're at war with somebody else and at war with situation. And you need to be like, I need the god of communication. I need the goddess of wisdom. I need the goddess of focus. You know what I mean? And you have your names for those, and you have those, and those personifications are useful because they communicate through them. That's how they meet us, looking like us, so that we can have relationships with them, because they're on the deity plane. They're gods and goddesses. They're not the same realm of creation. But when like the liver and the heart are in good communication, the whole body works better. And so like this is part of the evolution of the whole and the evolution of consciousness overall, is learning how to work better in the body of the universe that we're in, so that we can be in communication with the divinity that precedes us and that we're in active work with. And so like, how do we, overcome that saboteur? We're not trying to change the story that we're in every time we hit a new story. We're not trying to keep the story that we were in previously and tyrannically enforce that one. No, we're meant to say, I am slaying dragons as I go, because I'm working with divinity and they're giving me everything I need and they're teaching me. And as they teach me, I can hold more and more power and authority. And that power and authority is dominion. And I hold it not in control, but in allowance, because I'm a student of divinity. I'm not its master. That's the key. That's the key to being in harmony. That's the key. You don't need a rule book when you know that you're a student of divinity, because you're listening. And you're refining that listening, and the universe is cooperating with you as a result. The authority that you earn is in direct correlation with the amount of time, space, and devotion you put into your relationship with divinity. And should it be another way? And that's not like calling for power, because Goddess knows, like, the way that power structure is right now, that's a curse nobody wants. Nobody wants like power in this world in a certain way. No one necessarily even like the responsibility, So it's not for a person to hold power. It's for divinity to hold power. And the people that are able to sort of move out of the way and incorporate divinity and refine themselves and refine divinity, become divinity in relationship to divinity, like it's an easy yoke for that person. Because they're not making decisions about holding power. They're just a master. They've reached mastery. The goddess of wisdom and her devotees are wise. And so you can ask them questions. It's almost like being in a university where and that is what it is. It is being in a university. It's being in a university in a light attribute. The light attribute of university, style of governing. In a creative economy, like, duh. You know what I mean? So like moving towards that kind of where people who serve the god of science can achieve mastery and then do very cool magical things when they make stuff that takes all of the elements magically. And as magicians, now we have a cell phone, or we don't need the cell phone because we figured out something even more, that human potential is our greatest resource when we understand what we are and what we're capable of and what moves through us and what can move through us. And you should move as in a lifespan. You should be learning you should be a student. This is a governing by like learning and mastery, and not a governing by control and slavery. And so when we look at like how do we overcome sabotage? Well, the shadow aspect of sabotage induces self-destructive behavior or the desire to undermine others. That's a competitive asshole. No, you know what I mean? Like, so, if we're out in the field and we're trying to move mountains and we're trying to get from one point to another, and there's some competitive asshole who's standing there with a sign being like, my God is my goddiest. You know what I mean? Like, what are you supposed to do to that person who's standing in your way? Well, you're supposed to figure out a way to use the divine aspects that you have. You're like, okay, I'm calling on the divine aspect of this drive. If this drive is the dark shadow aspect of war, it needs to have dominion over you. And so it's like, and it's a supremacist. So you're like, I'm dealing with the spirit of supremacy. What defeats the spirit of supremacy? actual confidence is one of the aspects. You're going to need some, you're going to need you're going to need an alchemy of things. And like, no one wants to have to deal with that person. Nobody wants to have to deal with that person. That person is in the way, unless you understand that you're in a student teacher learning mastery. How are you supposed to teach people how to like be equitable in the world and treat everyone with an expectation that they are on the road to divinity instead of should go straight to hell? You know what I mean? Like, people will choose to be a nuisance, but you have the power to become immune, and you also have the power to learn what it means to disarm that in another. And once you learn, it's like you catch a fish, you have dinner forever. You learn how to disarm that in one person, you can disarm it in others. And then you can teach others having to deal with whose area of giftedness is having to deal with that specialty of knotted, humanity. You learn how to disarm that in another. You can not only disarm that in everyone you meet, you can teach it and it spreads. And then we have healing that takes place. And so, we don't look at others as, people to defeat. We look at them as energies of like destruction that we need to have an authority over. And that means actually having some interface, having some interaction. That's like, how do you slay this demon? You have to engage with it. Say, what is the demon? What is the demon doing? How do I like deal with this demon? And then you have to call for help. And say, divinity, I call on you, and you name the different attributes of divinity that you think you need. And you can even say, and I needed aspects of divinity I don't even know that I need. And you call on your ascended ancestors, and then you watch a beautiful thing happen. And you watch what it is to bring divinity into the world, and the power that divinity has. It's a reward system that gives you confidence. And so the next time someone comes at you with, my God better than your God, you say like, I don't care. I have confidence. I've already established that your opinion of me is not going to affect my self-image, because there's a lot that I've worked through when I've worked through others like you. And here's how I know how to disengage. This is how I know how to like disarm this, not just in the other person, because it's not your job to save anybody. You disarm it in yourself, you become immune to the other person. That's what you're learning in like the way that you learn by interacting with this energy. And so when we see like this victory with this 10 of Swords and this Pioneer, how do we have victory with this dead corpse of a way of a worldview that is hanging on, gasping with its 5 like jagged last breaths, and how do we deal with this corpse of a being that is the shadow aspect of the war god that seems to be the god of our time, because that worldview operated in shadow and now has to die and give birth to something new. So how do we do that? We pioneer. So, when we understand what the saboteur, that shadow of self-destructive behavior to undermine others, to be in competition with others, when we understand that the light attribute of this, the God of this energy of destruction is the one that highlights your fear of self-empowerment and the changes it would bring to your life. So, it's not that we can't have no fear. I want to be fearless. No, like that's just another archetype, and that's an archetypal story that we overcome through the experience of encountering it with divinity, not by ourselves, not overcome, not an orphan, with the armor and we call in the essences that we have within us, and the rich tapestry of ancestors that back that information and that are behind that ascension that have brought us to the place in our species where we are anyway. We take that help, we get in that hot air balloon, and we allow ourselves to be lifted up above the situation so that we can see the landscape, and then we make decisions with and co-creation, and we bring divinity into the world. We bring that perspective into the world, and then that small perspective of my God's better than yours doesn't really hold any weight. And if it does, again, that's somebody else's story that you're not a part of. You've disarmed it. And this is a process, because the Pioneer says that you're not going to get there in a day, and you have to work through the archetypes yourself. And so the archetype that you're in, Let me just read this. You know, the shadow aspect of the pioneer, of what it means to move forward, of what it means to find a new way. We want to be with the calling in the energies of ascended nature and saying ascended, you know, Athena. And it's weird because you have to just think about it as the, you know, not really heaven and hell, just the infinity and where we are and where we need to be. And again, it's not deterministic. We're not taking dominion over. We're listening. Where am I, Athena, in terms of like what needs to be learned and what needs to become conscious of in like the ascension of the whole of and like bringing this into the world? Because, you know, compulsive need to keep moving on is the shadow of pioneer. So if we're just like sensation seeking and escape seeking, then we're going to the part of the deity that has to get us off of its teat, because you know, we have to be able to move through a lot of territory with a lot of different tools. And so when we are pioneering, you know, passion for doing and creating what has not been done before, that means co-creating. That means being open to inspiration, and that's taking that inspiration and giving it some form of expression in the world. And so like so that's kind of the call. You know, I think Circe kind of wanted us to do this reading because she wanted us to be able to identify the story that we're in, identify, like, we're working with alchemy. She's teaching us alchemy. She's teaching us magic. And she's saying, you know, for you to hold the authority and the power to say, like, this is what looks true in the face of you're not true, and have it actually be like of resonance to those in harmony with that symphony, going in that direction, because that's going to be you. We got a little recipe. You know, this is what it means when she says, you know, we can't, where she's going with the Gospel of Circe. And again, it's up on the Patreon. Yeah, it definitely is. It's about, I'm going to post it as I go, but this is sort of like, this reading is kind of like augmenting that, because it's not just identifying the God that somebody else is serving or the God that you're inadvertently serving by participating in that game on the board. Either because it's happening, you're in the archetype, you're stuck there, you got there, you know what I mean? Or because you're choosing it, or because your soul is choosing it for some reason to learn something with the essences that you are meant to develop with. So when we step into the spiritual work, and when we enter the spiritual work, you know, what she's kind of giving us in the way of like how to begin to think about like what it means to do this, it's to express divinity. And the light attribute, and that's pioneering. So we're being told that the new worldview and this pioneering comes in relationship to divinity in these ways. And so this monk card here, selfless devotion, and like, so when we think about what it is to be a spiritual person and to do the spiritual work and to be a part of that movement forward, the shadow attribute is negative judgment of the physical world and excess piety. What we're not doing is sitting on our high horse and being like, look at those fucking idiots. So fucking, oh my God, the stupidity. I know I'm guilty of it too. Like, I'm just, as Lisa Lee, like, this has been my journey right now, is to like not just be this like critical, like, look at you, look at how you, oh my God, how did it, like, it's literally like I have to, like, because I'm in the like I'm in a place where the spirit of supremacy like reigns like almost ubiquitously. Like I find myself, these energies are contagious. So when everyone's holding supremacy, I'm walking around being like, these fucking idiots, I can't believe how below me they are in thoughts and ways of, look at you looking at me in that stupid way, and I'm so smart. Like, literally, that's how I had to like stop and be like, wait a minute, I'm carrying this energy, I'm participating with this energy. That's the wrong, like, and it's like totally what we do as humans. If we're not aware of what we are and we're just picking this stuff up, it's really hard to fight the energy of supremacy when everyone's a supremacist, because you have to be the nun. You have to be the monk who's able to, in the battlefield, like, put yourself in a different altered state, because you know that altered state because that's your God that you spend time with and you're able to like retreat there, like goddess that you spend time with because you're able to retreat there. And you also have to know what it means to be like open to receiving the alchemy of different deities in their divine form, because not every like situation calls for just the one. And they know that if they're smart, if they're not an insane god that's on the shadow end. Shadow attributes want to dominate a situation. Light attributes want to, like, and again, it's like this is going to be growth or rotting. Growth attributes want collaboration. Shadow attributes want to run the show. So, you know, you're going to be able to start to identify this stuff really, really quickly. And so, like, to be this representation of divinity, even when everything else around you is screaming this other energy, is not to be in judgment, not to hold that energy, but to go into this energy of, you know, selfless devotion and single-minded dedication to spirit. Is like you're in such a good relationship with the divine energy of Circe. You're in such a like a joyful state in the divine energy of Athena, or the divine energy of like any deity that you love. You're not like, it's like having a best friend with you, and like you're not looking at judgment, because you're with the friend who like doesn't do that, and like you're not judging people with that friend. Like you're talking about concepts, and they're giving you information that like is wow, like amazing to think about, and they're stoking your creativity. That's a cool energy to be spending time with. And so like, how do you defeat false piety? You don't mask where you're God. And you actually do spend the time, and you put yourself into that relationship, and you say like, you know, there are going to be times when you're with a deity that you're just like, you know, not seeing, you know, like you're like not wanting to be in excellence. You're wanting to be in slothiness, and that's okay too. But that means that you need a break from that deity. And so like you have to, because you're not going to be like, you're not going to hollow yourself out for the possession of the agenda of something that's in shadow, which means that you have to be presence itself. You have to have a presence, and you have to know the presence that you keep, because that's where choice comes in. So I'm glad I'm going to put this up right now. I'm so excited about this reading. This is Lisa Lee. We did not do 50 million cards. Circe's like a different vibe, and I encourage you to work with her, because she's like a cool friend. Like and like friend is not an irreverence. Like I was saying this to one of my friends today, and she might hear me like quote myself in. That's okay. Yeah, but I was saying that like I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, Circe. Like in terms of divinity, like the essence of like friendship, that you like are in like awe and in love. Like, you know how you have like friend love, and you're like, hello friend, you know, like she has that like quality about her. Like Circe is the worship of friendship in a way, like because you get to know deities in relationship to them, and she's like that girlfriend who like, or guy friend, or it doesn't matter genders. Circe is a girl, so she identifies in that, you know, feminine aspect. And don't let me speak for other energies, but I kind of, you know, you feel where an energy is, where it is, you know. So anyway, so she's kind of this like beautiful, solid friendship worship in a certain kind of way. So it's like getting to know a deity is also knowing what is worship worthy in them, and being able to sort of like, and that's where emulating comes in a positive way. So I'll learn all of this. We'll seek and learn. I don't think it's coming through. Like she's like, that's not coming through exactly right, but there's something to it. So anyway, she gave us great information today. She's channeling the Gospel of Circe. I do encourage you to read it, and there's more to come. And I guess when we work with Circe, we are using this method, and this is actually gonna end up being a book, like, because that's what, anyway. So that's what I was gonna say. When I started writing that I'm channeling through, like I'm actually gonna, like I saw what it's gonna become. And it's going to become something really cool. And so we're going to be doing this style of reading and writing and I hope that it's, you know, if it's too much, you just pick and choose what, you know, you take as much as you want, whenever you want. There's no time limit, or there's no getting it or not getting it. So yeah, let's leave it there. And I'm so happy that we got this, because I think I needed this information too. So also use cards like what we just did in terms of like figuring out what story you're in, figuring out the different components of the story. Definitely start to use your cards as a divination tool, where you say, I call on the ascended ancestors, the ascended gods and goddesses, those, you know, the ascended aspects of my deity for the purpose of growth, and then sit down with these cards and just find out, you not necessarily, these ones are cool. This is like a good combination, but like any cards that you have will do. And that's prayer, you know, right there is prayer. I mean, at your own unction, but this is what it means to communicate with divinity. And so they're really encouraging you to use this method of what's the story that I'm in and how do I overcome it, or like, what do I need to get out of it? And just, yeah, like the working out of it. So as you work out these questions, and you put it into an expression, any way that you put things into expression, you're writing scripture or you're creating divinely inspired art, because you're taking inspiration and you're making it something. And so I think that that's part of what we do as a collective in the way that you do it. And that's why it came through the way that we're doing it. And Circe is very much like a writing kind of a energy also, which is all weaving. All gods and goddesses that do weaving with words, which is cool. So anyway, I'll stop talking. I'm gonna stop channeling there. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day or night, and I'll see you again soon.